Okay, so one of the repeat questions you see these days is, can you play Genestealers as effective units in the new Tyranids Codex? And, you know, sure, if you remember the Genestealers in 5th edition, they were quite scary because they all outflanked and they could assault out of the outflank. And so they were really, they're a fairly competitive combat unit, and in 5th edition, combat was maybe a little more effective. You didn't have to worry about Overwatch, getting hit by flamers and stuff. And so Genestealers were kind of scary. And then with 6th edition, they got knocked down, and there was a lot of people who hoped maybe they could assault back out flanking with the new rules, or maybe that's what the data slate would give them. Clearly, it didn't. But it did change them, and if you're going to ask the question, can Genestealers be an effective unit? I would have to say yes. And I'm going to base this on some real experience. And one of them was, I played in a tournament recently, and the guy who won, he fielded something like 70 Genestealers, and it's a really hard thing to beat. He also had some flying Hive Tyrants, so he took down other people's flyers and was apparently lucky in that. He didn't go up against 3 Helldrakes or something. But Genestealers can work, and they work because they are troops, so they're still scoring, and they have that outflank ability, which is great with troops because it means you can get them on objectives backfield. And they have infiltrate, so same thing works at the beginning of the game. You could even pick up the relic potentially at the beginning of the game with infiltrate, just depending on how your opponent placed things. But back to the Genestealers. So if you're using all the 6th edition rules, you're not ruling out data slates or allies or whatever, the Genestealers work. And I think the new Tyranid data slate on the Leviathan Rising gives 2 really useful upgrades to Genestealers, despite what certain people are complaining about. They still can't assault out of outflanking. We know that. So, if I read this correctly, they're considered a formation detachment out of your codex, which means they hold all the rules for your codex. So they're still a scoring unit, but they don't count for one of your 2 troop choices. So even though you have to take 5 squads of Genestealers, you're still going to have to take an HQ and 2 troops as part of your core codex list. So that's important to know. But can these guys work? Well, if you take the Manufactorum Genestealers, these guys come as, you must take 5 squads. You can't add extra Genestealers, but it doesn't say you can't upgrade one to upgrade to a Broodlord. So this is my homemade Broodlord. So you could take a Broodlord. So that gives you 6 guys, 5 to 6 guys per brood, and they come with a couple rules that are different from the normal Genesteal rules. One of them is hit and run, and hit and run is really useful for Genestealers because what Genestealers don't want to get is bogged down by units that they either can't kill or just instant deathing them, ignoring their armor, which could happen. So the hit and run rule lets you get out of that kind of combat. And then the models can be set up 6 inches from an enemy model if it's in ruins or building at the beginning of the game. Well, this is situationally useful. I mean, at my gaming club, we have a lot of terrain, which is ruins, and so this is useful because you're not setting up 18 to 12 inches away, which would let you potentially assault on round 1 if you went second. Now, why did I think this became more competitive? Well, one of the things that Genestealers have going against them is that they have a 5-up armor save, and so bolters, for example, just kill them. Way the game works, if you have a squad that gets the option to shooting at opponents, they can only shoot at 1 target. There's a couple things that can change this that have split fire, but for the most part, you can only shoot at 1 target. So the way I see this actually being fairly competitive is you're taking 5 squads of Genestealers. You might be taking 8, I'll explain in a second with the Broodlord, but you're taking those 5 squads, and when you do this, let's say you have a squad of 5 Genestealers, standing right next to them is another squad of 5 Genestealers, and somewhere very close by is another squad of 5 Genestealers, and another squad of 5, and another squad of 5. Say you put them all down at once. You don't have to, but when they're getting shot at, let's say they're in ruins because you've infiltrated them in, there are Marines there, say there's 5 Marines in a tactical squad that's been split in half. They shoot rapid fire. They're going to hit 5 times on average, somewhere around there, maybe 7. They're going to wound, if they hit 7 times, let's say they wound maybe 4, and the Genestealers are going to get a 4-up save in the ruins, so they're going to lose 2. Now you've got 3 Genestealers left, but there's a bunch of other intact squads. Your opponent has to decide, do I want to take my next squad and shoot at those Genestealers, which have been reduced in number, or do I want to shoot at one of the intact squads? You can't split fire at 2 different squads and say, well, there's only 2 Genestealers left in that one squad, I don't want to deal with them. If he makes that decision, he or she makes that decision, then that squad is still intact. It's not highly effective as just 2 Genestealers, but if standing next to it is another squad of 2 or 3 Genestealers, they're essentially more effective than they were as one brood, because the unit of 2 Genestealers can easily, say, do a charge first and be backed up by the squad of the 3, and they're protected from Overwatch. The larger squad would be protected from Overwatch. If you have a Broodlord there, remember the Broodlord, if he's the last remaining guy, he's got a much higher toughness than the Genestealers themselves. He's toughness 5, so he's pretty hard to kill. He's not going to instant kill with most weapons. And he's a troop upgrade, so he's a scoring guy with psychic powers that can pin your opponent. So I think these guys are actually pretty good with that data slate upgrade. Then there's an even better option in many cases, and that's you can take the Broodlord's hunting pack, and nothing stops you from taking both data slates. The only limitation, once again, is, for the way I read it, they don't count as troop choices for your mandatory 2 troop choices. So you're still going to have to take 2 more troop choices, which could be Genestealers if you wanted, and then you're looking at a really insane number of Genestealers on the field. Okay, so if you take these guys, you have to take 3 Genestealer broods with the hunting pack, and one of them must have a Broodlord. These packs could be larger. It does not say that you can't take 21 Genestealers, 20 normal guys, and a Broodlord in one of these packs. So it could be a pretty big squad. And they have even better rules for deployment. I'm going to repeat that. They have even better rules for deployment than the Manufactorum Genestealers. The Manufactorum Genestealers infiltrate 6 inches away, but there are things that block infiltrators. There aren't many. I mean, it's servo skulls, and frankly, you don't see that too often. And then the space wolves have some sort of icon that sits in the middle of the table often that keeps people from infiltrating, like Watcher of the Dead or something like that. I don't play space wolves very often. So you got those. These guys have a better rule. It says that units from the hunting pack, they don't have to, arrive from reserve in an unoccupied building, so maybe your opponent has some fortification that's not occupied, they can actually get into it. Alternatively, and this is the cool part in the rule, alternatively, they can be set up in ruined terrains as long as they are more than 6 inches away from enemy models. It did not say they're infiltrating, which means you could potentially put 21 Genestealers 6 inches away from anything, even if it's servo skulls. And if it is servo skulls, on round 1, the servo skulls explode, because they go away when there's an enemy with 6 inches away from them. So, these guys, you could put a whole bunch of Genestealers in any ruin on the board, as long as it's 6 inches away from an opponent, and they're not infiltrating, which is important, because there are things that stop infiltrators. I displayed a Mechanicum list the other day. They keep people from infiltrating within 24 inches. These aren't infiltrating. And then they have they also have the preferred enemy special rule against models from a single enemy unit, and that can be pretty useful. I mean, if you pick the right unit, that makes the Genestealers more effective because they're rerolling their ones to wound as well as to hit in that first round of combat. So, maybe it's in all rounds of combat, actually. So I think with the new data slates, assuming your gaming club lets you use them, you got a lot more flexibility with the Genestealers, and it's important to note that you don't have to use the special rules. So you could still give your Genestealers outflank, because they all have infiltrate, and preferred enemy if they had the Broodlord hunting pack, but you don't have to put them on the field at the beginning of the game. Same thing with the Manufactorum Genestealers. It does not say that they must be deployed within a building. It just says that if they are, they can be infiltrating within 6 inches of an enemy model, but they don't have to. And so you get Genestealers, assuming you were going to take a lot of Genestealers and you had 2 other troop options, it gives them hit and run. Hit and run's a great rule because it lets Genestealers get a tremendous movement possibility, and it lets them get out of combat that they don't want to be in, which is one of their limitations. So I think these data slates really gave Genestealers a leg up for competition, and I think if you fully embrace the data slate and you took the Lictor broods, then you get some benefits there too. I mean, the Lictors basically can be placed within 6 inches if it's in a forest terrain. So, and you can take Lictors. Lictors are great along with Genestealers. I mean, I think a fun and competitive list, as long as you're not going up against a tremendous number of flyers, are an all-Lictor Genestealer Death Leaper army with maybe just a Turbogon in the back somewhere, spawning out some Gants on your backfield line. And you know, as a mostly infantry army, it's not bad. They have rending, so they can take out most vehicles, and if there's a lot of guys, they certainly can. So responding to some of these videos to question, can Genestealers be competitive? I think they can. I think the new data slates just gave them a leg up that made them better.